Hello and welcome to Urban X-Files. Today is another continuation of strange things that have happened to people on our haunted roads. This is a story about a gentleman who had a terrifying experience on the M62. Now, this gentleman had gone to perform for one of his shows. This guy is a well-known entertainer around the Merseyside area, and this particular evening, his usual performance went well, and he was enjoying some drinks that were given to him by some of the people when he went back to have a drink at the end of his show, and he was relaxing and unwinding before he took the trip back home. Now, he decided he would go back on stage for another 20 minutes, 30 minutes to give an encore, an extra performance. And while he was doing so, he caught the eye of a very beautiful young lady, and this gave him the little bit of kick that he needed. He felt better with it. He still got it. So he was overwhelmed by this beautiful lady who caught his eye. Now, after his performance, the whole room gave a fantastic round of applause and were made up that they got to see extra time of one of their favorite entertainers. So the guy went over to the table where the lady was sitting, and she was sat alone. And he went over and he asked if he could buy her a drink. And the woman smiled and happily accepted without any hesitation. She was a very pretty lady, very slender, attractive, and even more so, closer he got. And these weren't they weren't his drinking goggles that he had on. She had piercing eyes, green, hypnotizing eyes. She had long brown hair and a very soft-spoken voice. Now, he couldn't distinguish where her accent was. She was so softly spoken, but she did not have an accent as such that he could put his finger on. Now, he ordered champagne, trying to impress this beautiful lady, and the woman was not a fan of champagne, and she said, "I'd just prefer to have a soft drink or a juice or a water, if that's okay." So he said, "Fine, happy days," and carried on drinking his champagne. Now, there was a stay behind in this venue, and it was not long before the entertainer and this beautiful lady had a little dance. Now, towards the end of the night, the dance turned into the romantic slow songs it does before it finishes, and the guy found himself in a tight embrace with this lovely lady. He couldn't believe his luck. Now, he learned that the reason she was on her own is that her boyfriend as such had arranged to meet her at this club, yet he stood her up, no contact to her whatsoever. And she said that she lived in Liverpool, or not far from Liverpool, on the outskirts. And he said to her, "Well, if you've not been drinking, so I've had a couple of drinks, so if you're interested, you can drive my car home, and I'll get a taxi after I've dropped you off and come back the next day and pick up my car." So she said that she wasn't happy with the idea of him taking her to her house and him getting a taxi from there. So she said he could stay overnight if he preferred, until he was fit enough to drive in the morning. So, early hours, this particular night, early in the morning, the two of them left this venue, and they he opened the driver's door and he invited her to take his seat. So she did. He closed the door, went round, sat in the passenger side, and he gave her the keys, and she drove away. Now, as they were driving down the M62, it was a bit chilly. So, being the gentleman that he was, he took off his coat and put it around the back of her to keep her warm until the car heated up. As the couple drove down the M62, he started to fumble with the controls to listen to some music. But as he went to do this, her hand intercepted and she grabbed hold of his hand. So, feeling that he was in for some fun, he sat and smiled and sat in silence as the car travelled down the M62. Now, suddenly, he was staring from his alcohol mist that he'd had through having some drinks, and he turned and gave this stunner a look, and he looked and had to blink twice because he's seen something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. And still to this day, he has nightmares about this experience. Now, the girl's stunning features had seemed to contort into what only described as a demonic scowl. Her head swiveled towards him like it was not part of her neck, like you see in the film The Exorcist. And as her head twisted, her eyes turned into a dark colour, whereas beforehand they were green and really hypnotic. This time they were dark and soulless. Her mouth opened, this lovely smile that captivated him before had somehow become elongated and had this demonic grin upon its face as it looked him in the eyes, and the mouth had opened even wider, twice as wide as what a normal human mouth would be able to open. And not only had their beautiful white teeth smile had now disappeared, and instead these yellow, pointed, jagged teeth were replaced, and this instantly shook him out of his drunken haze, and he was terrified. He did not know what to do. He thought that she must be some sort of entity, and God knows where she was driving him to. Was she driving into him the depths of hell? He just didn't know. And it was as if this entity was able to read his mind, because the thing that was driving started to cackle and laugh in this evil, terrifying way. She began to swerve the car in and out, and they were traveling at excessive speed. This was the first time he actually wanted the police to see him speeding so they could pull him over and he would have an escape. Now, as she went between the various lanes and zigzagged across, he wasn't a typical religious guy, but the man began to pray. He prayed aloud in front of this entity. Now, the car then began to screech and turn, and it slid the motorway down the embankment, and it veered into like It veered into like bushes off the motorway, and he opened the door and tried to get out, but in panic he forgot to undo his seatbelt, and he was trying so hard to escape from his own car. And when he managed to get out of the car, he fell to the ground and stumbled up and went forward, and then he stopped because he thought maybe she was going to come after him. He turned around and the car was empty. He stopped and he stared, and he walked back over to his car, terrified, where he looked into the driver's side and was not able to see anyone there. So he went in, he opened the door. There was no sign of this entity. So he was that scared, he didn't know what to do. So he started to walk along the hard shoulder of the motorway. And he was so thankful when he seen blue flashing lights. And the police had pulled over next to him, and he began to tell them the tale of what had happened. The police just could smell the ale on the guy, so they thought, well, maybe he's had one too many drinks. So they sort of dismissed it. They took him, they didn't arrest him, but they took him back to the police station, where he was able to give an account of everything that happened that night, because the woman had terrified him. So he wanted to be around people, and he felt he was safest at this police station. Now, so he told the police where he was performing. He told them what happened, literally everything that happened. So the police investigated this strange case. I don't think they would have normally, but because this guy was well known, they took a liking to him and wanted to investigate, to get to the bottom of it. So they went back to the club and investigated, and they checked the cameras. Yes, he was talking to a woman, but for some reason they could not distinguish any features of the woman, because whatever angle she was at, it's as if she knew what the cameras were facing, because she was either just out of sight, or there was something that would take the focus away from her face. So it could be she was sat under a light, and the light was too bright for her face to be given any discernible features. And they asked if they'd ever seen this particular woman before, yet no one at this venue was able to say who she was, where she came in. It's as if she just appeared in there. A while, he contacted psychics and various things, and he was still unable to get to the bottom of this bizarre case. And after he'd done some research, he began to find that he's not the first person to report something so strange. There was a number of people who'd all experienced this demonic entity. Now, the twisted part of the tale, I have to say, is that the other people who had experienced this creature, they all had one thing in common. They were all men, and they were all men who were married. And it turned out that all these men were known to be cheating on their wives, girlfriends. So was this a female ghost who had been stood up by her boyfriend and found out that he was cheating, and whatever happened, she committed suicide, or this entity took a dislike to infidelity and decided to plague on these people who did not believe in the sanctity of their marriage. Here is another continuation of some ghost stories on our roads. This takes us to the M62. On the 27th of November in 2004, my husband was working nights as a truck driver on the M62 near Whitley Bridge. He was travelling along this stretch when he nearly knocked over a lady who was walking down the hard shoulder. She was dressed in a G-string and a jumper. Thinking it was someone who had possibly been attacked, he pulled over 50 yards up the road and got out of the truck to help. She walked up to him and he asked if she was okay. She just muttered something, turned around and started walking in the direction she'd come from. My husband then got into his truck and called 999. The police came along with the helicopter with the heat-seeking camera. It was around 11:30 p.m, but she completely vanished because there had been no other reports to the police about her. It seems like the only person who saw her was my husband. By the way, his brother was with him and saw her too. What was she doing there at that time of night? Why didn't she accept any help, and where did she go? Nothing seems to add up, and we are coming to the conclusion that they saw a ghost. There are quite a few strange stories about the M62. Me and my wife were travelling north on the A12, driving back to Lowesoft from Ipswich. It was about 10 p.m. on the 9th of August in the early 2000s. We were approaching the Beccles turn when a cyclist pulled out right in front of me from the junction. I was travelling about 60 miles an hour and could not stop in time, and the cyclist turned and smiled at me as I hit him. There was a large impact. Immediately after I stopped, I got out of the car. There were vehicles by this time slowing down behind me. I checked all around the car for the cyclist. I looked underneath the car. There was no sign of him. Not even any sign of the push bike he was riding. I rang back to ask the people in the car behind me if they'd seen anything, yet they hadn't. My wife phoned the police for them to check the area in case the cyclist was thrown to the side of the road somewhere. They found no sign. There was no damage to the car, even though I'd felt the impact of the cyclist hitting my car. The police told me that this incident was not the first and is likely won't be the last. They claimed that there is a ghost which haunts this stretch of road, and I have to say it's a bit strange that the police would acknowledge a ghost and give it as a description for these repeated phone calls of hitting a cyclist. Now, 15 years ago or so, there was a young man in his late teens that was cycling on the A12 after the Beccles turn. The cyclist pulled out in front of a car too early and was killed instantly. The ghost of the cyclist really gave my wife and I a fright on that August night. I've travelled up and down the A12 and past this scene many times after this incident, but have thankfully not seen that ghost. Someone else would like to write and add in, as fantastic as this sighting sounds, the A12 cyclist has been witnessed many times by different appearances, like road ghosts have reported it multiple times, and these strange sightings go back into 1981 when there was an Andrew who encountered the figure of an old man on the A12 near Hopton, Norfolk, though he passed as he skidded out of control in his attempt to avoid the collision. On the 15th of July in the late 80s, the Sun newspaper described police bafflement at the disappearance of an elderly cyclist after being flattened by a 38-ton articulated lorry that was driven by a Frenchman, Didier Chachandre. The driver told of the dragging the unconscious and bloody cyclist to the roadside before he was seeking help. He returned with the police to the scene at the A12, at Kelvington in Essex shortly afterward, but all that was found was the old man's torch, his pump, and his false teeth. There were no remains. The ghost remains to be solved. But have you ever experienced anything like this? If so, please do let me know. I will be happy to listen to your encounters. Take care and see you all in the next video. Peace.